Greetings, everyone! Last time we discussed Series 4, we went through what TCG duelists would view as the GOAT format era. Yet, Series 4 OCG goes beyond that, so let's take a look at what happened in Yu-Gi-Oh! In Japan during this period. Mutant Chaos was the dominant deck thanks to game speed by means of the current March 2005 list. It was a good period with minimal degenerate decks. This would all change on May 26 with the release of the next core set, Cybernetic Revolution. The mechanical set would include a number of powerful cards like Dragon's Mirror, Miracle Fusion, and the OTK enabler, Magical Explosion. If we were to talk about a single new card, that had to be, no, not Jerry Beans, man, Cyber Dragon. This high-level monster can be special summoned if your opponent is the only one with a monster on the field. This monster was great, as it outpowered Berserk Gorilla and protected itself against the popular Tsukuyomi. Likewise, it gave leniency to the going second duelist who lost the coin flip. Now both players had some form of advantage. Having such an easy method of special summoning as well as a new standard for offensive monsters was truly a revolution. Cyber Dragon would remain a staple for years to come. Even Cyber Dragon would come in different forms, given its impressive fusion options, Cyber Twin Dragon and Cyber End Dragon. Twin has a double attack, whereas End can deal piercing damage, making them both fearsome fusions that Cyberstein can easily bring out. So now a Cydra OTK is possible in conjunction with specific spells. Even more so when considering that a Blackluster Soldier Envoy at the beginning, plus Metamorphosis, could also bring out Twin for a potential game shot. The influx of machines led to the rise of the Devil Gadget OTK, a strategy that combined the removal gadget deck with Stein and limiter removals, since the gadgets, Stein, and Cydras are all machine type. One benefit here was that it countered Mutant Chaos, given the deck's fast speed and the piercing option against GOAT tokens. Now GOAT duelists had to start running reactive traps like Bottomless Trap Hole, Sakuretsu Armor, and Threatening Roar. The biggest disadvantage with the Devil Gadget deck was that the mirror match inherently countered each other, and should the deck fail to OTK swiftly, the mid-game was tough to rebuild combo pieces. Nevertheless, it was still competent, and Cybernetic Revolution had a huge impact on the metagame. The Cyber Dragon archetype made a splash in a way unseen at the time. Everyone needed at least Cydra and Twin to play at the top level. While Mutant Chaos and Devil Gadget were fighting it out, the next core set would be released on August 11th, Elemental Energy. The set introduced the Dark World archetype that sadly would not make any waves out of the gate. One that would make waves would be Hydrogeddon. Upon destroying a monster by battle, you can special summon one Hydrogeddon from your deck. This monster could potentially be explosive against the relatively weak gadget monsters. Normally, gadgets would get an advantage via one-to-one trade-offs. Now, Hydro gets around that if an attack goes through. Due to Hydro's low 1k defense, if you have a gadget next to it, the gadget would take an opposing Smashing Ground, or Fissure for that matter. Thus, Hydra would become another new popular attacker, even if it's not as good against Mutant Chaos. Another positive was that Hydra was a common, meaning duelists at all skill levels had a good chance at obtaining and playing it. The Water Dinosaur even got a rogue deck in Virusgeddon that made use of Crush Card Virus to get rid of opposing strong monsters so that Hydro can get attacks in. This isn't to say it was the only popular deck coming out of Elemental Energy. Pot of Avarice, or perhaps calling it by its comedic Japanese name, Greedy Pot, was sought after since it can shuffle back 5 monsters in your graveyard back into the deck, and then you can draw 2 cards. While it's more difficult to use than Pot of Greed, a purposely built deck could still make use of it. After all, it was a draw source for decks that ran out of steam quickly, like Removal Gadget or Recruiter Chaos. Recruiter Chaos was a newly formed deck that is like the successor to Tomahan, making use out of recruiters like Mystic Tomato and Apprentice Magician, as well as Chaos monsters. The deck was mid-range that prioritized ability over explosive plays. Merchant Pot Turbo would arise as well, running Magical Merchant to field the grave for Avarice. This was like a higher risk version of Recruiter Chaos. Though oddly enough, the strategy was less turbo in the general sense, and more turbo in regards to Merchant and that card's flashy playstyle. One card from Elemental Energy that was lurking in the background was Cyber Blader. This fusion contains different effects depending on how many monsters your opponent controls. It could be summoned easily by Metamorphosis, and Duelist tried to make use out of its third effect where your opponent's card effects are negated. During this time, the ruling was that it would negate permanent effects that did not involve activation, creating a powerful lock. Combined with Ojama Trio and Ground Collapse that would ensure 3 monsters and no more, the deck was quite the annoyance. Especially when you consider the time limit rule, where you have way more control over the opponent, and given the OCG's lack of a surrender rule, this was equivalent to playing Victory Dragon. Yikes, hope that card doesn't see play too. Thankfully, the deck wasn't actually that strong in practice. You needed Stein, Trio, and Collapse, and no response from the opponent during all that setup. That and the fact that the Stein variation drastically reduces your own life points, meaning your job is not done. As such, the Blader lock was powerful, but a one-trick pony that had structural flaws. Not long after, there was a player callout for the dissolution of the time over death, and an emergency rule followed that penalized the duelist for any action that prolongs the progress of the duel, thus killing the Blader lock in some regards. August would end with a powerful new card from the valuable Book 8. Here we have Doom Caliber Knight, a living monster effect negate that backs it up with killer stats. This makes your opponent have to deal with a deadly pincer. On average, the Knight will ensure you a +1 for a monster destruction and effect negation. Now, the downside is that the negation is mandatory, meaning constant effects like Sinister Serpent is poison. Knight is a skillful card in that, in the hands of a bad player, it's a self-destruct button. However, in the hands of a good player, the new Caliber deck would rack up wins due to its net positive exchanges, thanks to Knight, Cyber Dragon, and DD Assailant, a type of good stuff deck. Then, at the beginning of September, a new list would drop that would determine the next format. Anyone familiar to the TCG's October 2005 list would know what to expect. The precision hit against Mutant Chaos was heavy given its entire engine was limited. People could still play the cards, but it was now seasoning in other decks. Many other of the Vile cards were openly banned, like Blackluster Soldier Envoy at the beginning, Delinquent Duo, and Ring of Destruction. Most of the highly adopted cards disappeared, making the September 2005 list a big one. Furthermore, the ironic limitation of limited removal hurt the machine decks running around. Thus, Devil Gadget reduced back into Removal Gadget. As for cards coming off the list, Confiscation and Darkhold returned, which was a form of exchange given the newly banned cards. And the unlimited cards were barely used, so this adjustment makes sense. Given Mutant Chaos was hit so hard, Gadget was expanding its influence. As such, a face-down environment had emerged, or rather submerged, and other cards like Mobius and decks like Recruiter Chaos saw more play. The list was good in regards to game balancing, it's just that not everything is what it seems. While the list was shaking up the landscape, 2 new decks arose out of nowhere. A control deck called V-Dragon Control, as well as a combo deck called MCV, short for Morphing Cyber Victory. As the name roughly suggests, they revolve around Victory Dragon. The gold monster is not an unknown card, having 2 OCG prints by this point. It's a match-winning card that was legal prior to Konami marking the championship cards as otherwise. It's a rather cumbersome card to play given its strict summoning conditions and specific effect. But in September 2005, things were different. Firstly, the MCV deck had an infinite loop that revolved around a deck destruction framework to gain a surplus of resources, cause a burn loop, and use D-Tribe for Victory Dragon to end the match. Despite the scary sounding deck, in actuality it was tough to pull off due to potential disruptions. The other deck, V-Dragon Control, was the one seeing results in tournaments. It used the same D-Tribe concept to get out Victory Dragon, with the difference being its Pac-Man engine and lock element, using cards like Tsukiyomi, Mask of Darkness, and Time Seal to stun the opponent long enough for Victory Dragon to get that match shot. Remember, with no surrender rule, your opponent couldn't just quit the game before Victory Dragon attacked for a game. The reaction to these decks was fierce, as duelists would revive the Decree Horse deck in an attempt to counter V-Dragon, a strategy that gained strength from Avarice being able to recycle back Horse level 8 if need be. So how did these annoying decks get discovered? With the disappearance of Mutant Chaos, gadgets were running free. That is, unless they were placed in front of another control deck. Ultimately, a beatdown deck can't get their 1-for-1s if they can't get into a 1. This is where Gadgets needed to make full use of the side deck with cards like Mobius, Royal Decree, and Chiron the Mage, given main deck options were limited. At least you weren't going to see other Rogue Victory Dragon decks like Cosmo V, a variation on the Cosmo Lock deck that uses Spatial Collapse, and Dragon Beat V, a more casual dragon strategy. And if you're enjoying this video and want to support the channel past conventional YouTube means, then make sure to join my Patreon for as little as $2 a month or a little bit higher if you're feeling extra generous. All the help goes a long way to ensure the future of the Janjo Zone. Needless to say, the September 2005 list made quite the environment. Thankfully, November would eventually come with the next core set, Shadow of Infinity. The set would be known for a few cards, including Demise, King of Armageddon, and Doomdozer. Yet the one that garnered the most attention on release was Treeborn Frog. This is a self-regenerating monster during your standby phase if you don't have any back row cards on field. It's easy to see that this is a great engine to fuel for tribute plays that would help establish the Treeborn Monarch deck. This control deck was quite an innovative one given the previous state of tribute summons. It makes full use of Frog and Monarchs to gain an overwhelming board advantage. And Frog was easy to get into via cards like Foolish Burial, Mother Grizzly, Damage Condenser, and Last Will. Will was certainly active given the supplemental monsters when looking at DD Warrior Lady, Sangan, and Hand of Nephthys, which would get out another self-reviving monster in Sacred Phoenix of Nephthys. Thus, playing a high Monarch count was fully reasonable, something that would absolutely not be prior to SOI, since Frog essentially allowed you to summon the Emperors for no cost. The deck still had weaknesses, primarily in Frog being anywhere other than the graveyard. Should it be banished, then you were SOL. It was a possibility given the existing banishing cards, and playing such a large, high-level monster count was a double-edged sword. If you had too many, then they were dead cards. If you didn't have enough, then Frog wasn't doing anything either. Regardless, the deck was popular and powerful that had proved to be a meta shift from Gadgets. Mobius alone gave it an advantage against V-Dragon control, not even mentioning if you run specific counters like Janjo, of whom is another Frog target. In many ways, Treeborn Monarch saved the OCG from entering another Dark Age. Another month passes by, and mid-December sees the appearance of Dandelion as a V-Jump promotional card. This weak monster has a strong effect where it special summons 2 tokens when sent to the graveyard by any means. So Lion is essentially 3 monsters in 1, which synergizes with the Monarch strategy. Although you can't use the tokens for a tribute summon the turn they are summoned. The plus side being is that you can play Lion whilst having back row cards active. As such, this new Lion Monarch deck was less explosive than the previous iteration, yet it was more stable. 2005 was a wild year for the OCG, from Cyan Turtle to Mutant Chaos to Devil Gadget to V-Dragon to Treeborn Monarch. But will 2006 be even more chaotic? February 2006 would bring the final core set of Series 4, Enemy of Justice. The set introduced plenty of good cards like E-Emergency Call and Icarus Attack, as well as the unusual card Life Equalizer. More importantly were the Banished Trinity, Banisher of the Radiance, Dimensional Fissure, and Macro Cosmos. All 3 cards have a similar effect to replace the graveyard with the Banished Zone. On paper, these cards don't really do anything. In practice, however, they would be cataclysmic. By this point in the game, plenty of decks utilized the grave like Monarch and Recruiter Chaos. Previously, Kaiku was your best out, but now you have a group of cards that straight up stop grave-related actions. This new form of removal upgraded Gadgets to the new Flash Gadget build. The Banish era had begun. More decks arose, like the general Dimension Beat deck that used the Banishment as more strength than disruption. Even Dimension Monarch would show up to use banish-friendly monsters like DD Survivor and the Orb to fuel tribute plays rather than use Treeborn Frog. In some scenarios, these Banish decks could win without doing much. Generally speaking, it was Flash Gadget that gained the most from this new set's transaction. The Banish era would come to a collision in March by means of a new list. The main regulation was in the forbidden status of Victory Dragon, killing all V-Dragon strategies. Konami was not messing around when it came to the match win deck. Furthermore, Time Seal was banned, and Mask of Darkness plus Drop-Off were limited, preventing any semblance of the lock from returning. MCV was also hit by banning Cyberjar and limiting Temple of the Kings and Magical Stone Excavation. Also, Exchange of the Spirit in conjunction with Last Turn were banned as further proof of Konami putting a hard stop to OTKs. Konami was continuing to make general health regulations such as the limitations to Frog, Lion, and Last Will. At least Monarch still had searchers like Grizzly and Foolish. Some duelists would even try combo cards like the Fluta summoning Karibo for tribute fodder for a Karibo Monarch deck. Sounds fun. Not stopping there, Konami will hit Recruiter Chaos and Merchant Pot by ways of banning Pot of Greed, limiting Pot of Avarice, and semi-limiting Faith and Apprentice Magician. Though the banning of Greed was a bigger deal given its 100% deck adoption rate and sheer length of time the card's been around. And since this list, it has never returned. A banish era in a different sense. Further changes shows Konami's stern view on the meta. Out was Tribe and Dark Hole, yet back was Charity and Mirror Force as a form of peace offering. Even something as small as limiting Deity Assailant made the Psycalibur deck retreat from the meta scene. Due to this March 2006 list, gadgets would once again prove to be on the same level as Death and Taxes, with Decree Horror seizing more room to rise up anew. Having Charity back, as well as the relaxation of Deck Devastation Virus, would give power to the Dark World archetype, of which would combine elements of Chaos to create the Dark Chaos deck. I suppose it was too early for limitations to the Banished Trinity, but the adjustment of the pre-existing problems was now a solved issue. The final part of Series 4 was a V-Jump Spring 2006 subscription bonus for those who subscribed to Jump in autumn of 2005. One of the two promo cards that would leave a huge impact on the game was Green Baboon, Defender of the Forest. When a beast-type monster on your field is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, you can special summon Baboon from your hand or grave by paying 1,000 life points. Getting this high attack monster was rather easy given it replaces a monster and it doesn't cost much. Especially considering it beats over any monarch, it was worth it. Under the original ruling, you could even chain multiple baboons together to summon 3 strong beaters. And the unlimited status of Foolish mean you can get access to Baboon quickly. This was a new power dynamic that created the muscle-brained Beast Beat deck. The build makes use of all the annoying beast types like Berserk Gorilla and King Tiger, and including the more resistant ones in Giant Rat and Nimble Momonga. Even Mad Dog of Darkness's 1900 attack stat was reason enough to run it. Your opponent would naturally be under a lot of pressure given the constant deployment of strong monsters. As you can imagine, its major weakness is Banishment. Flash Gadget, Dimension Monarch, and Dark Chaos all stood in Baboon's way. People would even start playing further banishing cards like Bottomless Trap Hole, Karma Cut, and Soul Release. Thus, the countermeasure and skill drain came to be, which could stop monsters like the Gadgets, Mobius, Radiance, and Chaos Sorcerer. After all, Baboon activated in the graveyard, bypassing the negation of Drain. Skill Drain Baboon became popular, with Decree Baboon being a less adopted build. Still, the deck had a consistency issue given it revolves around Baboon and you need it to get any real momentum going. Nevertheless, it was a top deck during the spring of 2006. This new meta was certainly different from the end of 2005. Baboon creating a deck single-handedly was certainly shocking, but it was a jump promo that became quite an expensive card to play 3 of. So it wasn't the only viable deck in a number of ways. As for Series 4 as a whole, it would ultimately end in April 2006, with Series 5 beginning in May 2006, 1 year in time after we started the second part of Series 4. It was a tumultuous period with decks changing and evolving at every step of the way. It did not look the same 1 year prior, let alone 6 months ago. At least Konami were constantly making attempts to fix the meta despite duelists finding degenerate strategies wherever they could. You could say in the simplest of words that the meta was interesting. Intriguing even. All that said, GX wouldn't be done here. Not by a long shot. Though that will be a story for another time. Duel on, passionate duelist.